They mocked me for being the poor one, until they discovered I paid every bill in that house. So, here's how my Thanksgiving went this year. And honestly, even now, it feels surreal to write it out. It started like every other holiday my family has ever hosted. Me driving across town with a trunk full of food, a knot in my stomach, and this tiny, stupid hope that maybe this year things would feel different. That maybe they'd actually see me. Or at least see my son Evan, without judgment baked into every look they throw our way. The air was cold that morning. One of those brittle Pennsylvania mornings, where your breath hangs in front of you like smoke. Evan sat in the back seat humming some song he made up, tapping his sneaker against the seat. He was excited, genuinely excited. "Do you think Grandma will like my shirt?" he asked, smoothing down the collar of the navy button-up he insisted on ironing himself. He even wore the little watch I bought him from the flea market last summer, the one he thinks makes him look grown. I told him he looked perfect, and he did. But the truth is, a part of me already knew the answer to his question. My mother doesn't like anything unless it comes with a receipt proving it cost more than she thinks I can afford. And she's never really looked at Evan the way a grandmother should. It's like she sees him through a pane of glass. There, but not important enough to focus on. When we pulled up to her house, the driveway was already full. My younger brother Logan always parks sideways like he owns the place, even though I'm the one who's been paying his mortgage for the last 3 years. I sat there with my hands still on the wheel for a moment, letting the engine tick down, just breathing. Evan unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward between the seats, his eyes bright. "Ready, Mom?" I smiled, or at least I tried. "Yeah, buddy, ready." Inside, the house smelled like turkey, but the factory-made kind, the one from the grocery deli that tastes like warm salt. My dad was yelling at a football game from the couch, the volume cranked so loud the hallway picture frames buzzed. My mom greeted us with that air kiss thing she does, the one where her lips never actually touch your cheek. Then she immediately peeked into my food containers to make sure I didn't forget anything this time. Classic. Evan stood beside me, hands clasped, trying so hard to be polite. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. She nodded without really looking at him. If she had blinked any slower, she would have missed him entirely. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. What still surprises me is how much it stings every time. Logan and his wife Bree showed up over an hour late with their twin tornadoes, Dylan and Chase. The boys ran through the living room like raccoons on Red Bull. One of them knocked over a lamp, the other grabbed a brownie before dinner. Bree just shrugged and checked her phone. My mom laughed and said, "Boys will be boys," even though she once gave Evan a 10-minute lecture because he dropped a napkin too close to the carpet. At the table, Evan barely touched his food. He whispered that his stomach felt weird, but he didn't want to leave early. "It's Thanksgiving, Mom," he said, trying to smile. "We're supposed to be together." Supposed to be. That phrase hit me like ice water, because I used to believe that too. I used to think family meant something, that loyalty and effort and sacrifice added up to love somehow. But sitting there, watching my mom beam at the twins while Evan quietly pushed his mashed potatoes around, I felt that old belief crumble another inch. Then it happened. Dessert time. My mom lifted the tray like she was revealing some grand treasure: pumpkin pie, chocolate cookies, pecan squares. The twins were practically foaming at the mouth. Bree grabbed 2 cookies before the tray even touched the table. Logan took a piece of pie the size of his ego. When the tray came around to me, I shifted slightly so Evan could get his slice. Pumpkin pie was his favorite. He'd been waiting for it all night. But just when his little hand reached forward, the tray stopped, and my mom pulled it back. "No dessert for him," she said loudly, her voice slicing through the room. "He didn't eat his dinner. He doesn't deserve it." The whole table went quiet in this awful, heavy way, like the moment right before a glass shatters. But no one said anything. Not my dad, not Bree, not Logan. The twins kept eating like little animals, frosting smeared across their mouths. My mom just stared at me with this cold satisfaction, like she was waiting for me to argue so she could unleash one of her speeches about respect and raising children properly. I looked at Evan. He didn't cry, he didn't complain, he didn't even ask why. He just folded his napkin slowly, so carefully, like he was afraid of making another mistake, and stared at the empty space where his dessert should have been. I swear, that moment cracked something open inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp and decisive, like a rope snapping in two. I leaned over and whispered, "Arms in," and Evan slid into his coat without a sound. I stood up, picked up my things, walked out the door. No one stopped us. No one asked if we were okay. No one followed. The cold air outside felt cleaner than the warmth inside that house. During the drive home, Evan stared out the window, his breath fogging up the glass. Streetlights slid across his face like waves. After a long while, he whispered, "Mom, I wasn't bad, right?" And I had to swallow hard before I could answer. "No, sweetheart, you weren't." When we got home, he changed into pajamas and curled up on the couch. I made him hot cocoa, extra marshmallows. He didn't ask about the pie. He didn't mention Grandma. He just rested his head on my shoulder and drifted off. I sat there in the dim light, watching him sleep, feeling something shift inside me. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of everything changing. The start of me finally standing up. The start of my family learning what happens when you push someone too far. And the start of Evan and me finding a life where we don't have to beg for kindness. A life where we're not invisible. A life where we get to matter. The morning after Thanksgiving felt heavier than usual, like the whole house had absorbed what happened and decided to sit with it. Evan woke up early, even earlier than he normally does, and curled next to me on the couch with his sketchbook. He didn't mention the pie or Grandma or anything that happened the night before. He just drew a picture of a spaceship and said he wanted it to have a shield so nobody could hurt it. I swear, sometimes that kid says things that slice right through me without even trying. I told him it looked amazing, kissed his head, and packed his lunch for school. Once he was on the bus, I just stood there on the curb, hands shoved in my pockets, staring at the exhaust trail until it disappeared. The neighborhood was quiet, one of those crisp Pennsylvania mornings where everyone's still asleep or hiding from the cold. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was accusatory. Like my own life was asking me what the hell I was doing, why I kept letting my family use me like some kind of human safety net. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my budgeting notebook. Yeah, I have one of those. A thick, beat-up spiral notebook full of scribbles and calculations, receipts taped in, post-it notes sticking out like feathers. I've always been the organized one in the family, but what they never bothered to understand is that I'm organized because I've had no choice. When you're a single mom with a job that barely covers basic bills, you either get good with money or you drown. As I flipped through the pages, I realized I had been drowning quietly for years, just smiling while holding everyone else above water. My parents' electric bill, Logan's car insurance, a credit card my mom forgot to pay off, the mortgage I was covering so Logan could get back on his feet, even though he's been sitting on those damn feet playing video games for the past 4 years. I started writing everything down in a clean list, the numbers stacking like bricks, their bills, their debts, their emergencies, that magically appeared every time I had something good happening in my own life. Some of the numbers I didn't even remember paying. It was muscle memory at that point. My phone buzzed constantly with reminders from their banks. Payment due. Balance pending. Overdraft alert. It never even crossed their minds to change the account emails to themselves. Of course it didn't. Why bother when I was the one cleaning up every mess? And here's the part no one in my family has ever known. That little online shop I run after Evan goes to bed? It's not a cute little side thing, like my mother calls it. It's a fully registered reseller business that I've built from scratch over the last 2 years. I source liquidation pallets, refurbish items, photograph everything, list them, negotiate with buyers, package orders, run the books, and ship from my garage. Some nights I don't sleep until 2 a.m., but it's growing. Fast. Last month alone, I made more than my full-time accounting job. But because I didn't want to hear my family's opinions about a real career, I never told them. They don't know I've been putting away savings for me and Evan. They don't know I've been running ads, negotiating contracts, or planning to expand. In their minds, I'm still the struggling, unlucky daughter they keep helping, even though I'm the one bankrolling half their lives. And the thing that gets me is, I let them. For way too long, I let them. Around lunchtime, my coworker Jenna called. She's the kind of friend who can hear a single hello and immediately tell if something's wrong. "You okay?" she asked. No small talk, no fluff. When I told her what happened, she was silent for a second, quiet in that way where you know she's furious on your behalf. And then she said, "Rachel, that wasn't about the pie. They've been chipping away at you for years." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't allowed myself to admit. She told me, "If you ever need to get out of here, you and Evan can stay with us for however long." Nobody in my own family has ever offered me something like that without strings attached. After work, I picked Evan up from school. He ran into my arms with that big grin that always melts me. We stopped for hot chocolate at a small cafe we both love, the one where the barista knows his name and always puts extra whipped cream on his drink. That's the thing about this country. Even strangers will be kinder to your kid than your own blood sometimes. While Evan drank his cocoa, I pulled out my notebook and added one line at the top of the next empty page. What would life look like without their weight on me? I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the first domino. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how exhausted I was, not just physically, but spiritually. Like my family had been pulling threads from me for so long that I barely recognized the person I'd become. And still, I kept giving. I kept believing that if I just helped one more time, maybe things would shift. But the pie incident made something very clear. They weren't going to change. They didn't even think they needed to. That night, when Evan fell asleep on the couch again, I turned off the TV and just watched him for a minute. His face was peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Kids notice things. He notices when Grandma ignores him, when Uncle Logan snaps at him, when the twins get away with murder but he gets lectured for breathing too loudly. He notices it all. And I realized, if I keep taking him back there, he's going to grow up thinking that's normal. That love looks like humiliation and silence and walking on eggshells. And I'll be damned if I let that happen. So after I tucked him into bed, I sat at the kitchen table again, stared at my list of bills, and made a decision. A quiet one. A private one. But one that was going to shake everything. I didn't hit any buttons yet. Didn't cancel anything. Didn't announce anything. I just sat there with my finger resting lightly on the edge of the notebook, letting the weight of that choice settle into me. I don't think my family has ever realized something simple. The quiet ones are the ones they should be afraid of. We don't snap fast. We snap once. And when we do, everything changes. 2 mornings after Thanksgiving, I woke up to the kind of quiet that feels planned, like the universe was holding its breath. Evan was still asleep, curled under his dinosaur blanket, his hand gripping that little astronaut plush he's had since preschool. I brushed his hair back, kissed his forehead, and stood there for a second just thinking. Thinking about the little boy who deserved a whole world bigger than the one my family kept shrinking around him. When I stepped into the kitchen, my phone lit up with 8 missed calls. 4 from my brother, 2 from Mom, 1 from a random number I didn't recognize, and 1 from Dad's old work phone, the one he only used when he wanted to sound serious. I hadn't even canceled anything yet, and they were already circling like sharks who sensed blood. Or more accurately, sharks who sensed the money well drying up. I poured myself coffee, opened my laptop, and hovered my cursor over the mortgage payment I'd been auto-paying for almost 3 years. 3 years of covering a house I didn't live in, a house my brother trashed, a house he bragged about at bars like he earned it. I took a long breath, whispered no more, and hit cancel. Just like that, a weight I didn't even know I carried finally slid off me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat there with the most profound quiet inside me, like something deep and stubborn finally clicked into place. And the timing couldn't have been more poetic, because right then, my phone buzzed again. Logan. I didn't pick up. It went to voicemail, and by the second word, he already sounded panicked. "Rach, hey, looks like something weird happened with the bank. Can you call me back?" Weird, right. God forbid he admit he needed me. An hour later, the knock came. Not a normal knock. The kind of pounding that says, "I'm not leaving until you answer." I peeked through the blinds and nearly laughed. It was my mom, arms crossed, not even wearing a coat despite the freezing wind. She always did this thing, show up looking cold and fragile so she could guilt you before even speaking. Like being cold was your fault somehow. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so she couldn't peek inside like she always tried to. She didn't waste time. "Your brother's in trouble. Payments bounced. Fees piled up. What did you do?" Her voice wasn't confused. It wasn't concerned. It was accusatory, sharp, loaded with the assumption that I owed them an explanation, owed them my labor, owed them my life. I kept my hands shoved in my pockets to stop them from shaking. "I didn't do anything. I just stopped paying bills that aren't mine." She blinked at me, genuinely stunned. Not because she understood, but because she couldn't fathom the idea of me saying no. "Family helps family," she snapped. "That goes both ways," I replied. She flinched. A tiny, almost invisible twitch. My mom hated when I made sense, hated when logic cut through her emotional manipulation. "You're being dramatic," she said. "This is about that stupid pie, isn't it?" I swear I felt heat rise behind my eyes, anger, grief, disbelief, but my voice stayed calm. Too calm. "It's not about the pie, it's about Evan." Her expression hardened instantly, like his name was an inconvenience. "He barely touched his food. He was being rude." "He was sick," I said, "and you humiliated him." "Oh, please, you're exaggerating. You always were so sensitive." That line, God, she'd used it on me my whole life. Sensitive, dramatic, ungrateful, the holy trinity of emotional gaslighting. I looked at her and realized she wasn't going to change. Not for me, not for Evan, not for anyone. So I ended it. "We're done," I said. "Stop calling, stop showing up, handle your own bills." Her jaw dropped. "You're making a mistake." I shrugged. "Maybe, but at least it'll be mine." She stormed off, muttering under her breath about ungrateful kids and modern parenting ruining everything. I didn't chase after her. I didn't apologize. I didn't crumble like I used to. That was the moment the first domino fell. By noon, my dad texted me from a number I didn't recognize. He always switched phones when things were messy, as if a new number could make him sound more authoritative. "Dad, I heard what you did. You need to fix your attitude and the payments before things get serious." I didn't reply. 2 minutes later, "Dad, don't ignore me." I blocked the number without hesitation. And then something unexpected happened. Something that proved how badly they'd miscalculated who I'd become. I got a second message from a number saved under Coach Daniels, Evan's old baseball coach. I opened it, confused. "Coach. Hey kiddo, your mom's been calling around saying you're losing it. Thought you should know." I almost laughed. Of course she was spreading the narrative before I even had the chance to breathe. Coach followed up. "Coach. Don't let them twist your story. You're a good mom. Evan's a good kid. Y'all don't deserve that mess." I stared at that message for a while. Sometimes the people who barely owe you anything see you clearer than those who claim to love you. That night, things escalated fast, like wildfire catching dry grass. Logan left 6 voicemails, each one sounding more frantic. "Rach, come on, just transfer it this once. Why are you doing this? You know I can't afford this house. You're screwing all of us." And my personal favorite, "You owe us." That one almost made me laugh. Oh. As if the years of payments, favors, bailouts, babysitting, silent endurance meant nothing to him. As if my existence was supposed to revolve around keeping him afloat. Around 8 p.m., while I was folding laundry, headlights swept across my driveway. Evan peeked out the window. "Is someone here?" he asked. I checked the peephole. Logan, standing there with his hood up, pacing like he expected me to swing the door open instantly. I didn't. I watched. I let him bang on the door, call my name, curse under his breath. He tried the doorknob once, just enough to test a boundary he no longer had access to. And then he left. No apology, no explanation, just frustration that the vending machine named Rachel stopped accepting his coins. When the house finally went quiet again, I sat on the floor next to Evan's door, listening to him breathe. And in that stillness, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. cold, sharp, liberating clarity. They weren't mad because they were hurt. They were mad because they lost control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I grabbed my laptop, opened every account tied to them, and one by one, I shut every door they had ever walked through. Old insurance accounts, backup phone lines, streaming services, a Costco membership they used more than I ever had, a savings account my dad once convinced me to open for emergencies. His emergencies, obviously. Each cancellation felt like untangling a knot in my spine. By the time I closed the laptop, my hands were shaking, not from fear but from relief so intense it felt like electricity. And here's the twist they never saw coming, the one that still makes me smile when I think about it. They had no idea that behind all their insults, their belittling, their entitlement, I had been quietly building a life without them. A business, a plan, an exit. And this was the moment the exit door finally opened. The fallout didn't hit all at once. It came in waves, slow at first, like a storm creeping over the horizon, and then, suddenly, without warning, everything broke loose at the same time. What surprised me most wasn't the drama itself, but how calmly I walked through it. Like someone finally realizing the fire behind them wasn't worth turning back for. The first sign came on a random Tuesday morning. Evan was at school, and I was making myself a grilled cheese because I'd forgotten to eat breakfast. The doorbell rang, and my stomach dropped. Not from fear, but from that weird sixth sense you develop after years of chaos. You can just feel when something messy is standing on your doorstep. It was Riley, my cousin on Dad's side, the one who always sat quietly in the corner at family cookouts, the one who saw more than she ever said. She wasn't holding a casserole or a guilt trip, just car keys and a look I'd never seen before. "Thought you might want to know before you hear it from someone else," she said. "Logan's truck got repossessed this morning." I blinked. "Already?" She nodded. "He didn't make a single payment since you stopped, and he's been telling everyone you sabotaged him." I let out a small laugh, maybe a little too sharp. Funny how grown men suddenly become helpless toddlers when the money isn't hand-delivered to them. Riley smiled, but it wasn't mean. It was relieved. "Honestly, everyone knows he's been using you for years. They just never said anything because your parents shut down anyone who tried. But now, it's all unraveling." That word, unraveling, stuck with me. Not in a guilty way, but in a strangely peaceful one. Like watching weeds finally get pulled from a garden you've been too exhausted to tend. Later that same afternoon, I got a message from my aunt, my dad's sister. She's the type who never picks a side, unless something truly crosses a line. And apparently my parents had crossed several. Her text was simple. "Good for you. Someone should have stopped your parents from babying Logan 20 years ago." I sat on my couch and stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the validation wash over me. Years, decades, of being told I was dramatic, ungrateful, difficult, and now people were finally saying what I always suspected. The problem was never me. It was the system my parents built, and the system I finally broke. But the drama wasn't done. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, Dad's handwriting on the front. For half a second, some pathetic part of me hoped it was an apology. I opened it and felt that hope evaporate instantly. It was an itemized bill, a literal invoice of everything they ever paid for in my life. $200 for groceries after Evan was born. $40 for gas money when my car broke down in college. $25 for a lost sweater they claimed I never returned. And the last line, bold and underlined, "We raised you, don't forget what that cost." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurdly on brand it almost felt scripted. I tore the letter in half, tossed it in the recycling, and poured myself a very large glass of wine. That night, for the first time ever, I didn't feel guilty about cutting them off. I felt justified. But the real gut punch came from Evan. That Friday, he came home from school holding a crumpled drawing. "Mom," he said softly, "is it true you couldn't afford dessert at Nana's?" I swear my heart cracked. "Where did you hear that?" "Caleb said his dad told him you were broke, and that's why I didn't get pie." I kneeled down, pulled him into my arms, and forced my voice to stay steady. "Sweetheart, that's not true. Sometimes adults say mean things when they don't want to admit they were wrong. But you did nothing wrong. And I promise, I can always afford dessert for you." He nodded slowly, but I could see it, the tiny, invisible bruise forming inside him, the kind you only notice years later, the kind I had a whole collection of. That night, something inside me hardened, not coldness, but resolve. A realization that staying in proximity to these people was like living next to a factory that slowly leaked poison into the air. You don't see the damage until you leave, and suddenly you can breathe again. And I wasn't going to let Evan inhale another ounce of their toxicity, so I went to work. I froze every shared account immediately, closed anything with their names on it, called a bank rep who knew me by voice at this point. "Are you finally cutting the cord?" she asked, half joking. "Yes," I said, "and this time it's permanent." The fallout was instant. Voicemails from Logan screaming about his kids, texts from my mom calling me cruel and ungrateful, silence from my dad, which was worse than yelling because silence was his favorite weapon. And through all of it, I felt calmer than I had in years. It was like my entire nervous system had been rewired. One night, around midnight, while Evan slept peacefully, I pulled out a notepad and wrote 6 words that changed everything. Find a way out of here. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was strategic, like suddenly seeing the blueprint of the life I should have been living all along. I listed cities with good schools, rentals I could afford, remote jobs I'd applied for months ago and forgotten about. I built a plan the same way I always managed everything, quietly, meticulously, efficiently. By the end of the week, the plan wasn't just theory, it was reality. I got an email offering me the remote job, found a 2-bedroom rental in a quiet town 3 states away, signed the lease, booked the moving truck, sold furniture on Facebook Marketplace, packed while Evan slept so he wouldn't feel the chaos, labeled boxes with cheap markers that kept drying out, didn't tell a single soul. And here's the kicker. The quieter I got, the louder the family became. A barrage of messages accusing me of abandoning them. Cousins chiming in with unsolicited advice. Old family friends guilt-tripping me about tradition. Someone even sent me a link to a sermon about forgiveness, which I deleted before the video even loaded. But Riley? She showed up again with Coco and a car full of moving boxes. "Honestly," she said, "I'm proud of you. You're doing what half this family wishes they'd done years ago." Her support wasn't dramatic or loud. It was warm, steady, real. The kind of support I never got from the people who claimed to love me most. And that's when I realized something I had never considered. Sometimes family isn't the blood you were born into. Sometimes it's the people who show up when the world goes quiet. The day before the move, my mom texted me one last time. "Running away won't fix anything. You'll regret this." But I'd already packed the last box. I'd already chosen the life Evan deserved. And for the first time in my entire existence, I didn't feel scared. I felt free. The first morning in our new place felt almost unreal. You know that feeling when you wake up somewhere quiet and your brain automatically expects chaos, but all you hear is the hum of a heater and birds outside? For a second I actually panicked, like something was missing, before realizing the thing missing was noise. Not yelling, not guilt trips, not footsteps pacing outside my door, just peace. Evan wandered into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, looking like a kid who finally slept without bracing for something. "Mom," he said, staring at the sunlight hitting our still unassembled dining table. "It smells like nothing." I laughed. "Is that good or bad?" "Good," he said. "At Nana's house it always smelled like people were angry. That kid, he notices everything." And in that moment, I swear, something deep inside me softened in a way I didn't know it could. I made us pancakes on the electric griddle I bought on sale last year, and we ate on the floor with paper plates because the movers wouldn't arrive until the afternoon. And honestly, it felt like the first real breakfast of my life. Over the next few weeks, we built a rhythm. A slow, steady, gentle rhythm I didn't know families could have. I'd work from the small desk I set up by the window. Evan would sprawl across the floor drawing superheroes with crooked capes. Some nights we'd walk down to the little coffee shop on the corner. They give him a free cookie every time because he always says please and thank you, and they think he's adorable. He is. But I think what they're really responding to is the way he's finally relaxing into himself. Like he knows he's safe. The messages from my family didn't stop. They came in waves, blocked numbers, emails, even a letter from my mom claiming she forgave me, as if I'd done something wrong. There was a voicemail from Dad in that icy tone he used whenever he wanted to intimidate me. "You're making a fool of yourself. You're isolating your child. We're concerned." Right. Concerned. The same people who didn't blink when Evan sat there staring at an empty dessert plate. But here's what shocked me. Every message felt quieter. Not literally. Some of them were dramatic enough to qualify for an Emmy, but quieter inside me. Their words used to hit me like bricks. Now they landed like dead leaves, light, brittle, irrelevant. The one person whose voice stuck with me wasn't any of them. It was Evan's new teacher. After his first week, she pulled me aside gently, like she didn't want to scare me. "Your son, he pays such close attention to how people treat each other. He's incredibly intuitive. He notices kindness, and the lack of it." I nodded, swallowing around something tight. "He's been through a lot," I said. "He's going to be okay," she replied. "Kids like him, they grow into adults who change the world." I almost cried in this hallway of an elementary school. Not because she said he'd changed the world, but because for the first time someone saw him, not judged him, not dismissed him, saw him. Winter turned into early spring. The snow melted. The trees along our street grew tiny green buds. I found myself walking every morning, coffee in hand, listening to podcasts that weren't about fixing family trauma for a change. Sometimes I'd pass neighbors who waved like we'd known each other forever. No one here looked at me with that strange mix of expectation and entitlement. No one asked me for anything. No one assumed I existed to serve. I could finally breathe. At night, after Evan fell asleep, I'd sit on the couch and think about everything that happened. The dessert plate, the calls, the bills, the screaming, the narcissistic meltdown. And instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. Not for them, but for myself. For the moment I chose us over them. For the moment I finally realized love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. One evening, Evan padded out of his room with his stuffed astronaut under his arm. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think they miss us?" I took a deep breath. "That doesn't matter," I said gently. "What matters is that we're not theirs to hurt anymore." He thought about that. Then he nodded, slow, thoughtful, like he was filing it somewhere important. "I like our new life," he said. "Me too, buddy." And that's the moment I knew I made the right decision. Not just a brave one, not just a long overdue one, but the right one. The funny part? Once we stopped orbiting their chaos, everything in our world got a little lighter, a little brighter, a little more ours. I don't know if my family ever truly understood why I left. I don't know if they ever realized their control wasn't love, their expectations weren't loyalty, their manipulation wasn't care. Maybe one day they'll sit in their quiet house, the one I no longer pay for, and realize what they lost. Not money, not convenience. Me and Evan, two people who deserved more than scraps disguised as affection. As for us, we're doing great, better than great. Evan made a friend who loves the same space comics he does. I got promoted 2 months into my new job. My therapist says I'm unlearning survival mode, which apparently is a thing. And sometimes, on nights when the house is still and the sky is clear, I sit on our porch and just exist. No buzzing phone, no guilt, no fear, just freedom. And here's what I learned, the thing I wish someone had told me years ago. Sometimes you don't heal by fixing what broke you. Sometimes you heal by walking away. By choosing peace over proximity, by choosing your child over tradition, by choosing yourself for the first time in your life. I used to think family was a bloodline. Now I know family is a lifeline. And some lifelines you have to cut so you don't drown. So if anyone ever asks me whether I regret leaving, whether I regret the fallout, the accusations, the silence, I'll say the same thing I whispered the night I closed my laptop and canceled every bill with their names on it. No, I'm finally free.
Nếu bạn muốn tôi có thể tốn.
In the end, what this whole journey taught me is something I wish I'd learned earlier. Peace isn't something you stumble into. Sometimes you have to fight for it, protect it, and choose it over the noise you were raised to believe was normal. Walking away from my family wasn't about winning or proving a point. It was about reclaiming the space inside myself that had been crowded for years by guilt, obligation, and that quiet fear of disappointing people who were never satisfied in the first place. You grow up thinking loving your family means carrying everything for them, but love without boundaries is just another form of losing yourself. And losing yourself is far more painful than losing people who only showed up when they needed something. What I know now is this: silence may keep the peace, but it won't keep you whole. Sometimes you have to break the pattern, even if your voice shakes. Sometimes you have to choose the door that takes you away from the people who taught you to shrink. And sometimes, family is simply the ones who don't punish you for standing tall. Like folks around here say, you can't pour from an empty cup, and I finally stopped trying. If any part of my story echoes something in your own life, I hope it reminds you that you're allowed to redraw the lines. You're allowed to start over. You're allowed to choose yourself, quietly, gently, unapologetically. And now I'd love to hear from you. What did this story stir up for you? Have you ever had to step away to find your peace? Share your thoughts below, hit like if this resonated, and subscribe if you want more stories that cut deep and heal slow. Thank you for being here. Wishing you calm days, warm nights, and the courage to choose what sets you free.